Oh, this is a picture of one of these early black publishers in Britain. And Old Age is saying to me, even though she's a very good friend, I can't remember her name. What's her first name?
Margaret.
Margaret Busby.
Okay.
And I'm sure I can remember Margaret from the days in the West End in the 1960s when jazz and black style was all the rage. We used to go to the Marquee Club in Oxford Street, Marquee Club when it moved to Wardour Street, and she reminds me of that period when it was all black jazz music and black jazz musicians, who were of course imitated by the whites. It reminds me of going to the Flamingo Club in Wardour Street. That was just all style. You know, we used to dress up and you go and do the twist and the jive. And it reminds me of the Rolling Stones. Used to imitate black folk music, black country music, down home blues music at a place called The Scene in Windmill Street. That's what she brings back memories of. Because I remember meeting up with her one day and she took this little book out of her handbag, which she'd just bought from a bookshop, and it was photographs of her and a group of people that I recognized from the mid-60s in the West End. Is that not too long?
Fine. That's fine. You say as much as you want, as little as you want.
Oh gosh. This is an image of a bust that I created of a very good friend of mine, Len Garrison, who was a real kind of inspiration because he went to New York and came across the Schomburg Centre, yeah? But he didn't realize what the Schomburg Centre, its structure, its history, how it's funded. But he came back to London and he said, we got to have one of those. And he worked and essentially killed himself working to create that Black Cultural Archives because, you know, he had a heart attack at one of the committee meetings and never. But I did this bust because we were very, very, very good friends. You know, it's like, even when he moved up to Nottingham with his family, he'd come down whenever he was in London, he would stay here. And I used to make plaster casts of people's faces and do masks of them. And he always used to say, George, when are you going to do my mask? When are you going to do it? I said, well, on Len, don't worry. And of course, he died before I was able to take the cast of his face. Yeah? And then his niece came along and said, she got some money from applied to the National Lottery for some money to do a bust to put in the archives. And would I? So of course. And this is the result. This is the clay of it before it was actually cast in bronze. Yeah, this is the clay. New Cross, Black People's Day of Action. I didn't actually go on the march.
Okay.
Because I had to go to a silkscreen print supplier somewhere off Marylebone Road in the West One area. And it was important that I got there to get the materials. So I decided I'd wait at Marble Arch for them to arrive at, Hyde Park. And that's what I remember. I can recognize one face here, which is of John LaRose.
Okay, yes.
He's right here in the front, but he's the only image that. But it was a kind of transforming moment, black people in Britain, because they just blocked the place, and they couldn't be stopped because it was important that they make a statement about the quality and level of racism that they were experiencing, which they did not expect, which I think a lot of us did not expect in such a brutal, open way. Of course, we grew up in a culture of racism in the Caribbean because it's actually based on plantation culture. But when you come to somewhere like this, that is supposed to be enlightened, and to find that the racism is even worse because it's so blatant, and because you're right there in its path. You know, I could say most of my 14 years in Jamaica, I probably met and spoke to half a dozen white people. They were there, but they were over there somewhere.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They're not your next door neighbor or your kid you sit next to in school who you have to fight. I mean, when I first went to school, practically every day I had to fight. You understand? Until a group of Scots kids from Glasgow, nobody could understand them and their Glaswegian accent. Nobody could understand my Jamaican accent. And they took me under their wings and protected me, and that's when the fighting stopped, when I had to fight every day to defend my very existence. So that's what this means. It's an expression of a kind of open protest about the race, because nobody really knew what happened when that house was burnt, you know. But it's the way the authorities dealt with it. The way, for example, the Queen didn't even send a message. A few days later or a few weeks later, something happened in Northern Ireland, and we had a message from the Queen. So, yeah, that's what this reminds me of. Another one of my images. What is this one called? God.
Is that the Caribou one?
No.
No, it's not. Okay.
It's that one there.
Yeah.
This piece is like, it reminds me, it expresses, if I could remember the title of it, I would be able to tell you more about it. But what it does is it shows you our dilemma, how we oppress ourselves to somehow fit into the expectations of the Europeans. So this woman on one side of her head, she's got a straight wig, you know, and on the other side, she's got these wood nails and filings from bits of steel that's been taken off of a lathe, which is sharp, which is how our hair is. When you feel it, you know it, because, you know, it's like it wants to cut you. Yeah, there's an intensity and a realness about it. Whereas the hair on the other side is dead. It doesn't have any, doesn't resonate in any way. And it really is about how we suppress and destroy our true nature, which is that razor bladey kind of character, razor blade-like kind of spirit. That's what this piece talks about.
Okay. Okay.
But you see, age is catching up on me because I can't remember the title of the piece. Now the title will tell you a lot more about the piece. This one is round the back there.
Okay, is that the one with the hair going?
Yeah.
Okay.
This one is called Iponri. And it's about consciousness which lies within the head. Within that Ifa philosophy, the head is the seat of consciousness. Yeah? And it is where our being resides, our spirit, our sense of ourselves reside. So it's important. And most of the pieces that I do have heads on them, even if they're split up into, yeah? Sorry, the head is the ori. Ori. That means the seat of the individual seat of consciousness. But iponri is a collective seat of consciousness. So it's all consciousness, collective consciousness, in other words, which is iponri, as opposed to ori, which is individual consciousness. So this is kind of in between the two. Yeah?
Read the bottom, and then that's the one that I wasn't going to put in, but I put in because of what you mentioned.
Well, I can't see with any great clarity what's on the ground. But I've attended 3 sarakas in Karakou. But the pronunciation could be Salaka, and it's really a feasting to celebrate death, or a tombstone feast. Is a lot of people. And the first one was for my partner's father, 2 years after he was buried, and it was the most amazing experience. It's one of the most African things, I think, that survived in the Caribbean, this saraka. Because what happened is the whole community comes together and they slaughter animals and they cook one day, and the next day everybody come back and eat and drink and celebrate the life of the person. So it was her father was the first one, and then when her mom died 3 or 4 years later, we went back and there was another one, where the pig is slaughtered, and at the doorstep, at the steps to the house, they slaughter the sheep and the goat. So the blood runs off onto the stairs to purify the space, and then it's most amazing. And I've got videos of both of them. And it really tells a story when young people who were born here who's never seen anything like that see it on the screen. It just totally blow them away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what it reminds me of also was when my father, after the hurricane in Kingston in the early 50s, and we got a piece of land and we had to build a house on it. The first thing they did was to slaughter a rooster and sprinkle the blood on the 4 corners of the house before they started putting up the main frame and the brickwork. So there's stuff like that. When I said in Jamaica they don't acknowledge the Africanness of it, and a lot of the sort of ones who have moved up socially look down and frown on that kind of thing. You've got to get rid of that. But that is their nature.
That's where they come from. So why
until you acknowledge your true nature, you're just a piece of thing blowing in the wind. And so I'm glad that this is still going on in I don't know how much it happens in Grenada. Or if the main island.
They do it in Grenada. It normally takes place in a place called River Sally, which is like near it's in St. Patrick's.
St. Patrick.
So it's in the north. So they still do it there quite frequently.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is a little piece of Africa still healthy in the Caribbean. Of that first time I went to Africa, and I went with Jimmy Cliff, and. We started off in Lagos and we toured the whole country for about a month, going from Lagos in the south as far north as I can't remember now. Kano.
Okay.
Kano in the north, and to see the transition from the traditional stroke Christian South, and then we went east into the river state, and then we went north, and then flew back down. But we also went west for a while. And it was the most amazing experience for me, you know. I mean, I remember the day we landed in the plane and the drive from the airport to the hotel. And I thought I was back in Jamaica in my early childhood days, because I recognized all the old women, because they were like, it's just like the old marketplace places in Jamaica in the 1940s and 50s. Same people, only it was just large numbers of them. You understand? They were like ants all over the place. So yes, and of course, all the roads were dirt, with the exception of a little stretch from Lagos to a place called Badagry. It was the only asphalt road outside of Lagos was that little strip down to Badagry. The rest of it was all all dirt.
Wow.
And we drove thousands and thousands of miles through palm forests and palm plantations on these dirt roads. And it was, I remember once we stopped in a village and we saw these two men completely naked with locks, short locks, holding hands, walking down the street. Never forget that one. But they weren't gay. It was just the way. You understand?
Yeah.
And nobody took any notice of them. And they're in the middle of the bush. That we stopped at this little market town. Yeah. Amazing, amazing experience that was.
Is that another one of your...
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is this? This is called Property of a Gentleman.
Okay.
It was weird because I found a Christie's, or it might have been a Sotheby's auction catalogue, and I saw this bust of a black man in some kind of black stone, and it was just like this. And I decided I would do a bust of this thing because there was something that was not African about in terms of the spirit that the image projected. And so I thought I'd actually make and put more spirit into the piece, more African spirit into the piece. And so when I completed it, I called it Property of a Gentleman, because that's the title of the pieces in the catalogue.
Okay.
Not that he was a slave and a property of a gentleman, but the objects in the catalogues are all objects of gentlemen.
Okay.
That's how they describe them. And of course they're priced in guineas, which is the way upper crust and wealth is actually measured or valued in Guinea. And what is the Guinea? Where did Guinea come from? The Guinea coast. Those early Guinea coins that were called guineas came from the gold from the Guinea coast. So here we are. We've got this piece of, might have been black marble, bust of an African. It doesn't have a title except Property of a Gentleman, and it's priced in guineas. I thought, that's such a profound series of coincidences that I had to give the piece the title Property of a Gentleman, because then it's all kind of double. Then it's, of course, he's not a slave, because if you see the chain around his neck, the chain isn't broken.
Okay.
He's wearing the chain like a cravat, like a scarf. And that's how we have to be. We can't let them chain us down with past histories, chain us down with their unenlightened stupidness. Yeah? We have to wear all of that. Just like you can take it off and throw it away if you choose. That's what this piece is about.
Don't worry, it will soon end.
Oh.
No.
Alright, this piece. Well, this is the map of Jamaica. And it's one of the first things that you had to learn to draw.
Okay.
Yeah, you had to learn to draw the map of Jamaica. And of course, got to a point where you could draw it with your eyes closed.
So much practice.
Yeah. I'm from Kingston, which is down in the southeast. And my mother and father comes from St. Anne's Bay. But I remember driving around the whole island when I went back with Margaret and her daughter in 95. We hired a car and drove all over the place. And got a sense of the island that even though every year my mom and dad used to go on an outing somewhere, you know, they'd have and of course it's long before you had comfortable coaches or minibuses, there were trucks, and they would put wooden seats across the bus, the truck, and we'd sit on these seats, and we could drive for what seems like hundreds of miles to a picnic place, and they'd take out maybe take out the curry goat and the white rum and stuff, and they'd pour white rum, because they never open a bottle of white rum unless you pour libation for the ancestors. That's another one of those African things that people don't even recognize what it is. And then we'd sit down and eat the curry goat and rice and peas, drink up the rum and the beer, and then come back home. So I got to know a lot of the island that way. But when I drove around in the mid-90s, I was able to make better sense, clearly, because by then I'd read a lot of the history from the Spanish, from the native Taíno people, and the whole of the culture that even the Taíno people passed down to people in Jamaica now. Spanish culture, because so many of the names of the places are Spanish still. And it made more sense, clearly, because I'd studied the thing, and far more enjoyable than a lot of people who were born and grew up there don't know half of the history and culture of the place. Where did you get this?
Just from your website.
Really?
Yeah.
Now this reminds me of the centre, the Keskidee Centre, up in just on the back of King's Cross Station, and it was the only real kind of cultural space for a long time, apart from the student centre in Earl's Court, where the various governments in the Caribbean funded this centre. And you go there and there'd be political discussions, there'd be art exhibitions. I remember Errol Lloyd had a bust of C.L.R. James at the entrance and so on. So yeah, that's what this reminds me of, the whole kind of culture that no longer exists. And it was almost as though it was independent. It wasn't like, you know, begging bowl kind of culture. And it gave a lot of people opportunities. There are many names here that you recognize. You know, Anton Phillips, Oscar Abrams, Evan Brewster, Malcolm Fredericks, George, you know, Lascelles, and so on. So yeah, that's what this, and I've got one of the original posters upstairs,
Okay.
which is how it got onto the website. Well, these people, oh right, I know
John LaRose.
John LaRose in the middle. And I don't recognize any of the other guys.
So the guy on your left is
He's an Asian-looking guy.
yeah, that's Sam Selvon, the Lonely Londoners.
Oh, right, writer.
And the other one is Andrew Salkey.
Yeah, another writer.
Yeah.
Not too sure. He's Jamaican, isn't he?
Yeah, he was born in Panama, but he
Grew up in Jamaica, yeah.
Yeah.
Not too sure, because he wrote a book that was very, very negative again around Africans and African, you know, it's to do with the Pocomania religion of Jamaica.
I've never read that one.
It was just, it was really pretty negative because because of its African origin and its Africanness, you know, which is quite the antithesis of so much of the. And you can tell, huh?
Of you.
Yes.
yeah.
And you can tell that he's not from the lower class people.
Okay.
You understand? Because by his collar, you know that he's somewhere a little bit up the social level that wouldn't go to a Pocomania meeting. You understand?
Yeah.
And so when he writes about this thing and voodoo and all that kind of unpleasantness in a negative way, it just put me off him. Even though he might have written interesting things, you know, but that one. Sorry.
Next. Yes.
The Windrush.
Yeah, and then it's got a protest at the bottom.
The Windrush generation helped to build Britain. Well, I don't know what that means, because I think we've been helping to build Britain from the time Britain started colonizing and enslaving Africans and taking them to the West Indies and America. We've been building this. So this is very misleading to talk about the generation of which I would be described as a Windrush generation. I came here 9 years after the landing of the Windrush, so, and I don't see how those few years can even be compared to the hundreds of years of enslavement, where people work for nothing, accumulated nothing. Lucky if they had a life with their own children. You understand? They couldn't even accumulate their own children and the pleasures of that. Yeah? So I would kind of dismiss this and say, no, go and study your history books.
That's a very
check it
interesting response. I wasn't expecting that, but that's good. That's why I like this, because I can't say anything, but I really wasn't expecting that response, but that's interesting.
Yeah, go and check out the history, man.
Okay. There must be like one left in there, please say. I think there's yeah.
No, there's more. I got at least two.
Huh.
Oh, this is a interesting man, Linton Kwesi Johnson. I've known him since the 60s in Brixton. And, you know, I was part of Creation for Liberation, which was that organization that the Trinidadian brother, what's his name? God, old age.
Was it the Prime Minister?
No.
Was it the guy that went back to Trinidad and unfortunately he committed a crime? And
No.
Alright.
No. Creation for Liberation is a arts organization, man.
Oh, Horace Ove?
Not Horace Ove, he's a filmmaker.
Yeah, filmmaker.
No, man, you know him. He had a television program and he used to be very aggressive.
What, Rudolph Walcott?
No.
Oh, Darkest How?
Darkest.
Alright, yeah, cool. Alright.
Darkest How.
yeah.
They're part of that whole organization with the creative. The very first exhibition, black exhibition I showed in, was at the St. Matthew's meeting place, organized by Creation for Liberation. And he was there, but he's a very complex person. Like, you know, I saw him the other day at an event and I said, do you remember in the early 80s, you and I had a conversation when you were telling me about acknowledging the limitation of your mediocrity, and he just burst out laughing. What is he doing contemplating his mediocrity and coming to terms with his mediocrity? And to actually say it to me, I never quite figured out. But he's brilliant. He's a brilliant poet and composer of cultural, whatever. Shan't say much more because for years I've been threatening to go and interview him in front of the camera.
Okay.
And the last time I saw him, he says, "Cha," he says, "a promise is a comfort to a fool." And you're always promising to come and video of me talking about my life. So he said, "I tell you what, I gave him one of my cards and said, listen, I tell you what, you call me when you're ready." So we'll see if anyone's promising.
Call back.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, last one.
Yeah, last one. Yeah.
Oh gosh. This one is called Modeling Jamie. It's a fascinating experience because it's the only white person I've ever done.
I realised that.
And his father was the managing, he was the manager of the Bering Bank out in Japan. Now the Bering Bank went bankrupt some years ago and older people lost a lot of money.
Okay.
Anyway, I was in an exhibition in a building opposite the British Museum. And this, in a very prestigious old kind of early Victorian Georgian building. And one day I got a phone call from the 198 in Brixton saying, there's an Englishman who wants to find out your address. Can we give him? So they gave him my address and he came to me and he says, I'm sorry about the confusion that I created at the space because all kinds of, too many black and African images inside this upper class building inside opposite the British Museum.
Wow, okay.
He says, however, I'd like to commission you to do a bust to my son. And I go, and he says, no. He says, I know you don't do white people. He says, I know you don't do white people. But, he says, I want a bust of my son that is done with spirit. And essentially what he's saying is that white art, for some reason going way back hundreds of years, negated the spirit from the object, because that's known as animism. And an enlightened Christian don't believe in, it can't be animists. So over the years they've cleansed everything of objects with spirit, the animus. He says, I want you to do a bust of my son that has spirit. I say, all right, well, I'll think about it. So in the meantime, I'll buy one of your pieces. So he bought a bronze piece.
Okay. So
he then rang me up. I said, all right, I'll come over. And he used to live off the on the back of Gloucester Road Station. And I went, and his son was about 11 when I started. So I took a cast of the son's face. But he was retired. The son's mother was somebody quite senior in independent television news. And he's in a private boarding school. So I started the thing, and he was about 11 coming up to 12. And I didn't finish it until he was about 14.
Okay.
That's what you see there.
Yeah.
Because he could only come when it was his turn to be with his dad.
Oh, right.
On his holidays.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah? And so I'd go with the bust, partly done, set it down, sat him in front of me, and he had changed because he was going through puberty.
Yeah.
So he started off as this little boy, and ended up with this teenage. But the father was just over the moon because he can see the spirit in the thing. He can see the spirit that is in African art. And that's what he wanted.
Okay.
He wanted me to come and spend time on his farm up in Yorkshire working, but too far from my culture, too far from my community.
Yeah.
Just too far.
Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah, that's it.